What's the biggest double life you've ever personally seen revealed? Story 1. A counselor at my college in Michigan faked his identity for over 40 years. Back in the 1960s, he was a civil rights organizer in San Francisco and got involved in a shootout with the police. None of the officers were injured, but he was shot in the foot. He was supposed to appear in court later, but he disappeared instead. Over the next 4 decades, he built a completely new life, earning a master's degree under a false identity and eventually working as a guidance counselor at a community college in Michigan. His real identity was uncovered around 2010, and he was put on trial in California for the shooting. He ended up being sentenced to a year in jail and fined around $8,000. He was a nice guy. You'd never expect someone who seemed so normal to actually be a fugitive who had been on the run for decades. Story 2. There was a kid at our church who started attending the youth group when he was about 15. Everyone liked him, but he was always a little reserved. Fast forward 3 years to graduation season. People kept asking him what his plans were after high school and if he was excited, but he always changed the subject. Eventually, he confided in one of the adults that he wasn't graduating because he hadn't been to school since he was 8 years old. His dad had pulled him out and never let him return. A lot went down after that, but the church members stepped up to help him. They got him into an accelerated high school program, and in just 3 years, he earned his diploma. Now, they've even covered his tuition so he can attend a 4-year university. Story 3. My sister-in-law had a second child while still married, though she was separated from her husband after catching him cheating. The father of her new baby was her father's former protege, who was also married with children. This all happened in China during the height of the one-child policy. For her parents, the separation and affair were a secret until the baby was born. Once they found out, they helped her maintain the lies to protect their reputation. Her ex-husband didn't know about the child or the affair. His family, with whom she stayed in touch, was also unaware of the separation, the affair, and the baby. The situation was even more complicated because she and her ex shared custody of their first child. To keep up appearances, they pretended to still live together for years. The older child was instructed never to mention his younger sibling to his father, despite spending time with both. Some close relatives knew bits and pieces, but to the outside world, including the prodigy's family and the government, there was no affair, no separation, and certainly no second child. How she managed to pull that off, I have no idea. She wasn't just living a double life, she was living multiple overlapping realities. Imagine the logistics. Getting a child who officially doesn't exist to school under a false identity, then picking up the older child who had just been with her secret lover, then making sure the lover got back to his real family while she reunited with her cheating ex-husband, so they could all attend a family lunch together, pretending they had come from the same home. All the while being careful that neither she nor her older son let slip that she had to pick up her other son from school afterward. Just thinking about it gives me a headache. Story 4. My uncle runs a business installing internet in hotels, which has him traveling all over the West Coast. Recently, he asked my aunt about having an open relationship. Turns out most of those business trips were actually to meet up with his business partner, who he's been having an affair with for the past year or two. And it gets worse. His mistress has been pregnant twice. Both times the pregnancies ended in miscarriages, but both were intentional. My uncle and aunt have been married for 12 years and have a 5-year-old son. My aunt, on top of all this, has terminal cancer. And behind her back, my uncle has been introducing their son to his mistress as his new mommy. Needless to say, that open relationship isn't happening. They're getting divorced. Story 5. Funny timing to come across this question today. A little background. About 7 years ago, my brother was struggling with addiction, using just about anything, though alcohol was his drug of choice. Our family has a long history of alcohol use disorders. He dropped out of school and spent a few years cycling through treatment centers and sober living houses. 3 years ago, he decided to move back, about 2 hours from my parents' house, and re-enroll in school. At this point, he was older than most students, and socializing was difficult, so he spent almost every weekend at my parents' house. He said he was pursuing a chemistry degree, constantly talking about his classes, professors, and coursework. He knew the schedules, described the teaching styles, and like clockwork, dropped off his dog at my parents' house during finals week to study without distractions. On Friday, our entire family traveled from all over the country to attend his graduation ceremony. We were beyond proud. We thought he had achieved the impossible, but before the ceremony started, we couldn't find his name in the program. Then we couldn't spot him walking with the other graduates. About 30 minutes in, my phone rang. It was him. He was drunk. Turns out he had never re-enrolled in school. He had moved back, convinced my parents to cover his rent and utilities for 3 years, and spent most of his time drinking, gaming, and sleeping. No one had any idea. He was so committed to the lie that he managed to fool his entire family and all his friends. We're not sure what happens next. My husband and I are helping my parents pack up his place tomorrow. It's hard to hold on to hope after this level of deception. He's hurt so many people along the way, but he's my brother and I love him. Here's to a brighter tomorrow. Thanks for letting me process this a bit. Story 6. When I first moved out in my late teens, I shared a huge house, 6 or more bedrooms, with a close friend, his brother, and some random roommates. It was basically a frat house minus the college part. Splitting expenses made things manageable. One of the guys supposedly worked at a port and customs. He had a uniform ID and a strict schedule. Left for work at the same time every morning, hung out with us afterward, and was always down for social events. Most of us liked him. After about a year, he started mentioning that he could get us discounted TVs and other electronics, unclaimed or seized goods that nobody really kept track of. It seemed sketchy, so we all passed. Then one day we came home to find one of our housemates sobbing, completely devastated. Turns out he had handed over his entire life savings to the customs guy and borrowed money from his dad because he was promised a cheap car. That's when we found out the truth. The guy didn't work at the port. The name he gave us didn't exist. We had no idea how he spent his days or where he got the money to cover his share of the rent and bills. Even now, it still creeps me out that I lived with a total stranger for so long without realizing it. Story 7. Growing up, my family hosted several exchange students, about 7 over the years. Each one stayed for a year, attended high school in our town, and became part of our household. One of them, Irina from Russia, arrived just like the others through the AFS program. To be an AFS student, you had to meet certain requirements. Be 17 to 18 years old, currently attending high school in your home country, and complete a thorough application process. Everything seemed normal when Irina arrived. She enrolled in our small-town high school in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and settled into life with us. Then around Christmas, she told us she had to go back to Russia because her mother was extremely sick. Going home during an exchange year was highly unusual, almost unheard of. But it was an emergency, so fine. She'd leave for Christmas break and be back in January. Except she never came back. AFS couldn't locate her. We had no way of knowing if she made it to Russia, if she was safe, or if something had happened to her. As her host family, we were devastated. We had welcomed her as one of our own, and suddenly she was just gone. Months passed. Then one day my mom was driving through town when she saw Irina. She wasn't alone. She was with a woman who looked like her mother and a few kids. Turns out Irina had already graduated high school in Russia. She wasn't a teenager. She was 25 years old with children. She had faked her identity to pose as an exchange student, using the program to case the area before bringing the rest of her family over. Story 8. I once worked with a guy who was known for his stories. No matter how loosely something related to his life, he'd turn it into an anecdote, something he'd seen, done, or been part of. At first, they were interesting. He had lived what seemed like an exciting life. Born in America, moved to Australia in his early 20s, worked in fascinating places. But after a while, we started hearing the same stories over and over again. I worked with him for a little over 3 years, and it became an office joke, how he never ran out of things to say. We knew everything about him, how he met his wife, his pets, his kids, every little detail of his life. Then one day he didn't show up. He had died of a heart attack. The whole office was shaken, especially our little department of 8 people. When his funeral came around, we all took the afternoon off to attend, and that's when we found out none of it was true. He hadn't grown up in America. His family wasn't who we thought they were. His old jobs had never happened. Every single story he told us over the years had been a lie. The part that stuck with me most? At one point, our boss needed someone to fly to China to check on a factory. When the usual people weren't available, this guy was chosen. It seemed like an obvious choice. He was always talking about how much he traveled, constantly visiting family in the US, and working overseas in previous jobs. Now, we think that might have been his first time ever leaving the country. Story 9. A couple of years ago, my grandmother passed away. While going through her house, my family found a box with my grandfather's name on it, written in his handwriting. My grandfather had died before I was born. The box was taped shut, and judging by the dust on it, it had never been opened. Inside, we found old newspaper clippings and other documents. Turns out that in the early 1900s, my grandfather had taken a road trip with some friends to see the ocean. During their trip, their car was stolen. With no way to get home right away, they decided to stay for a while, work a little, enjoy themselves, and make the most of it. During that time, my grandfather met a Mexican woman. Within a month, he married her. Among the documents, we found a newspaper article about the car theft, another about the marriage, and even a marriage certificate. That's where things get murky. We have no idea what happened next. Did they marry for love? Was it for her citizenship? Did they have kids? And most importantly, was he even legally divorced when he married my grandmother in the 1930s? We don't think my grandmother ever knew. We did manage to trace his first wife. She had returned to Mexico and eventually had children. When we reached out, her family told us they didn't believe she had kids from a previous marriage. We sent them copies of the documents we found, and they were just as shocked as we were. Story 10. In our mother's group, there was a dad who had once worked a high-flying finance job in the city. But after a market crash, he lost his job. With no openings in finance and bills piling up, he took the first job he could get, working in a chicken abattoir. Quite the shift from a corporate desk job to slaughtering chickens. But with a newborn baby at home, he did what he had to do. For context, a mother's group is a support group where new moms meet weekly to share their experiences. Occasionally, the dads would join for BBQs or other gatherings. Whenever I ran into him, I was always impressed by how knowledgeable he was about current events. We talk about politics, finance, and science, never much about butchering chickens. Turns out, he had been fired on his first day. For months, he kept up the charade. Every morning, he'd leave home as if going to work. But instead of heading to the abattoir, he'd go to the pub, read newspapers all day, and come home in the evening like nothing was wrong. Eventually, his wife found out. They're divorced now. Story 11. My brother was married to the same woman for 21 years. Around year 19, it became clear that my sister-in-law was unhappy and planning to move on, until my brother was diagnosed with cancer. She stayed, unwilling to leave him while he was going through chemotherapy and surgeries. But it was obvious that a separation was inevitable. Then one day while my brother was home alone and my sister-in-law was at the gym, the SWAT team broke down the door. They threw my brother to the ground, handcuffed him, and held him at gunpoint. They were looking for her. She was arrested at the gym on charges of child pornography, child rape, and child endangerment. Skipping some of the horrifying details, it eventually came out that she had been having multiple affairs and was leading a secret life. She ultimately confessed to the charges and was sentenced to 25 years in state prison. As if that wasn't enough, investigators found disturbing photos on her personal computer. Evidence that she had also been abusing the family dog. For years, she had been the daughter-in-law my mother had always dreamed of. None of us had any idea she had been living this secret life for 2 years before she was caught. Story 12. I served in the Navy from 1985 to 2005. While in my first squadron, 1985 to 1989, we were away from home a lot, either on short detachments lasting a few weeks or full 6-month deployments. During one stretch when we were home for a while, I was assigned watch duty in the squadron's duty office after hours. My job, along with another guy, was simple. Answer the phone, keep an eye on the hangar bay, and hold down the fort. Not long after our shift started, we got a phone call from the wife of one of the guys in our squadron. She asked when the squadron would be returning from detachment. I glanced at my watch partner, confused. We weren't on detachment. I told her everyone had been home for months. She insisted. Her husband had been out on debt for 3 weeks, and she needed to know when he was coming back. I assured her that nobody was away, and in fact, I had seen her husband at work earlier that day. There was a pause, then she hung up. Turns out her husband had been lying to her, telling her he was on detachment while secretly shacking up with his girlfriend for weeks at a time. She ended up calling the commanding officer to confirm when he had actually been deployed. That's when she learned that he had been pulling this stunt for years. Infidelity is officially against the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It didn't end well for him. Story 13. A fellow grad student I know has 2 young kids, one of whom is struggling to walk and communicate and is in the process of being diagnosed. She's balancing 10 to 16-hour days between interning, classes, and being a mom and wife. One evening, she got a call from a friend, excited to see her at her husband's work party. What? She hadn't RSVP'd, and her husband had told her he'd only be popping in for less than an hour before coming home for a quiet dinner with her. Turns out he was going, but with a date. They had been seeing each other for about 6 months, even taking a trip together under the pretense of a business trip. Looking back, every time he had been late or away, he had probably been with her. Her friend, realizing what was happening, did her a solid, snapped a few pictures, and sent them to her for the divorce lawyer. Story 14. Not exactly a double life, but my cousin was a secret for 4 years. When my uncle was 21, he and his girlfriend had a baby, but they didn't tell anyone in our large, nosy family. No one suspected a thing. They kept dating as if nothing had changed. When I was 8 and their daughter was 4, tragedy struck. Her adoptive parents were killed in a fire, and in their will, they stated that they wanted her to be returned to her biological parents. By then, my uncle and his girlfriend deeply regretted giving her up, so they were thrilled to get her back. The weird part? Everyone just rolled with it. No one really questioned how they had secretly had a child for 4 years. They just accepted it, and life moved on. My cousin is 14 now, has 2 full siblings, and my aunt and uncle are fantastic parents. Occasionally, someone brings up the situation, but it's usually just laughed off. Still, I can't help but find it a little odd. Story 15. My ex-wife lost 2 jobs within 9 months. Eventually, she landed a position at Hank's Furniture. A couple of months in, she told me she needed to work at one of their locations 2 hours away for 3 days a week. That quickly turned into 5 days a week. She claimed that in this role, she wouldn't get paid until after the furniture was delivered, so it would take time before she saw any money. Then she started staying overnight with her boss, a woman. I had a bad feeling about it, but when I looked her up, she was a real person and the store manager, so I let it go. But the money never came. I had 2 kids, a full-time job, and was constantly borrowing from my in-laws and parents just to stay afloat. Meanwhile, my wife was barely around. To make things worse, I had stupidly put her in charge of most of our finances. I didn't realize she had maxed out our credit card. Finally, after a month with no paycheck, I told her she had to quit and come home. She was furious, swearing she'd be paid tomorrow. And sure enough, $3,600 appeared in our account the next day. A few weeks later, I demanded she come home again. This time she did, but she wasn't happy about it. She even took our daughter with her on a trip to the store to pick up something she'd left behind. She took a photo of herself and our 5-year-old at the Hank's store, as if to prove she'd been there. Later, she returned one more time to pick up her paycheck, depositing $2,450. Then one day, I happened to check our bank transactions and saw an expensive lunch charge at Houlihan's, over $50. It rubbed me the wrong way. So I called the store where she had supposedly been working. When I got the manager on the line, I asked, "Hi, this is X, husband of X. Did you have lunch with her on Monday?" The response, "Who?" "X, she worked for you and stayed with you for the last few months." "I don't know that person. She never worked for me or stayed with me." A pit formed in my stomach. My head was spinning. I had to know for sure. I went to the Hank's Furniture in my town. They told me she had been fired months ago. There was never a transfer to another location. Panic set in. I got a lawyer and filed for divorce. That's when I discovered the truth. The 2 paychecks, they were payday loans from those same-day, high-interest loan places. And where had she really been? Staying with her ex-boyfriend from high school, presumably for S and drugs. She had gone to extreme lengths to keep her habits going while making a fool out of me. When she was served the divorce papers, she trashed my house in a rage. The silver lining? She didn't show up for the hearing. I got full custody of our kids. For a year, I allowed visitation at my discretion, but she rarely showed up. Eventually, she took me to court to demand scheduled visitation, only to miss that court date too. Cost me $1,000 for nothing. Years later, I remarried the love of my life. We decided to have my wife adopt my older 2 kids. I presented a 58-slide document of evidence proving my ex never paid child support and had been consistently absent. We won, the judge laid into her, saying all the things I had wanted to say for years. Closure is a beautiful thing, and now my kids don't have to suffer from the constant disappointment of a mother who never shows up. Story 16. A guy I used to work with lived in a small country town with his wife and 3 kids. When he was fired from his job, where I worked, the only position he could find at his level was in the big city, 2 hours away. So he would work in the city from Monday to Friday and return home to his wife and kids on the weekends. This routine went on for years. About 5 years into the arrangement, it came to light that he wasn't actually living in the small, rundown city apartment he had claimed. He was living with his girlfriend and their 2 kids. That meant he had a wife and 3 kids, plus a girlfriend with 2 kids, all biologically his. Apparently, the girlfriend knew about the wife, but the wife had no idea about the girlfriend. His 3 kids from his marriage had 2 younger half-siblings they didn't even know existed. Of course, everything exploded spectacularly when the truth came out. His wife kicked him out and he moved in with his girlfriend. But 6 months later, she got tired of him too and kicked him to the curb. Now he pays child support for 5 kids to 2 different women and actually lives in that small, crappy apartment he once pretended to have. Story 17. I'm not sure if this counts as living a double life exactly, but my mom was a total sociopath. She managed to present herself as this free-spirited hippie, I do anything for my kids type of mother, until I was about 23. That's when I found out she had been stealing my identity and forging my checks. Not long after, my sister and I realized that our dad, who had recently divorced her, wasn't lying when he said she had run up insane credit card debt, cashed out his retirement account, and filed false tax returns to cover it up. And oh yeah, the 19-year-old boys she let stay at our house because they had supposedly fallen out with their parents, turns out they were drug dealers. And to top it off, she was sleeping with them. So not exactly a double life, more like a staggering amount of lies and manipulation. She did a lot more insane stuff, but it would take way too long to explain. I cut her out of my life a decade ago. It was rough for a while, but now everything's good. Story 18. When my dad married my stepmom, my biological mother had passed away young from cancer. She seemed warm and genuinely proud to add me and my 2 siblings to her family, which included her 2 sons. For a while, everything seemed great. She was enthusiastic about making a home out of the fixer-upper house she and Dad had bought in a nice neighborhood. They had an active social life, a membership at the yacht club, apparently Dad's 20-foot sailboat qualified, and even knew the mayor, his wife, and a few local celebrities. Her only quirk seemed to be her ever-changing, self-employed careers. Every month she would shift between being a clothing designer, painter, decorator, importer, anything that caught her fancy. She had no qualifications, yet she somehow managed to secure contracts to renovate apartment lobbies or repaint large car dealerships. Then things started going downhill between her and my dad. She was impatient to climb the social and financial ladder, while my dad was careful and responsible with his money. Their arguments became louder and more frequent, until one tragic night, after a massive fight, she died in what was ruled an accident, a long story I've told elsewhere. But what was uncovered after her death was absolutely shocking. For years, she had maintained a downtown apartment where she hosted daytime liaisons with men, likely ones she believed could provide what Dad wouldn't: money. The apartment had a king-size bed with a mirrored ceiling and other features that no one would describe to me. One of her long-term affairs had been with Dad's employer, a wealthy married man whose wife we had considered to be one of my stepmom's best friends. Suddenly, the origins of her many business contracts became clear: her network of male clients. The exorbitant fees she charged for repainting and redecorating buildings had nothing to do with her skills. Thousands of dollars worth of high-end furniture mysteriously disappeared from one of her projects in a single night because, apparently, she hadn't bothered to secure it. To our neighbors and casual acquaintances, however, she remained nothing more than a devoted mother and homemaker who had died in a tragic accident. Story 19. She's long dead and buried, but I've wanted to tell this story for years. A few years ago, I started a business with a woman I considered a friend. As we traveled together, spending a lot of time in close quarters, she began to open up, sharing her past bit by bit. I don't think I've ever been more stunned by someone's life story. She was Canadian and had taken a job as a bank teller after college. Bored with her life and wanting to move to the U.S., she embezzled money from the bank and fled the country, changing her name. She built a new life, made friends, and settled in her chosen area. She embraced a wild lifestyle of partying, drugs, and drinking. During a rock concert campout, in a moment of reckless abandon, she shaved her head. This was in the mid-'80s when shaved heads on women were rare and attention-grabbing. Shortly after, she met a man who asked about her bald head. Without missing a beat, she told him she was undergoing cancer treatment. He took her at her word and, rather than questioning it, asked her out. Their relationship got serious. He became deeply supportive, even accompanying her to cancer support groups and doctor's appointments. Appointments she managed to manipulate so he never found out the truth. She met his family who adored her, believing she was a sweet, innocent woman overcoming a devastating illness. What they didn't know was that she was still secretly involved in drugs, running in dangerous circles. But then her church-going boyfriend proposed. She saw it as an opportunity to escape the chaos and said yes. Before the wedding, though, she needed to go to a cancer treatment center, which was actually a drug rehab facility where she attempted to clean up her act for good. They got married. For 20 years, she lived as a loving wife and mother, raising their daughter. Her husband and his family remained completely unaware that she had never had cancer, was not raised in Utah as she claimed, and was actually an illegal immigrant who had fled Canada after committing a felony. I never learned how she eventually relapsed into drugs, how the authorities found her, or how everything unraveled. But by the time she told me her story, it had been about 10 years since she was caught. She was still married to the same man, who now knew the full truth, but his family and their daughter remained in the dark. How they covered up the fallout from her lies, I have no idea. She shared all of this with me over a week-long business trip through Europe. By then, we had been business partners for 9 months, and everything was going smoothly. Then one day, while handling the company's finances, I noticed our bank account was overdrawn. That shouldn't have been possible. After investigating, I discovered that she had drained $50,000 from our business account for a long weekend in Vegas. She had no intention of telling me. This had happened just the week before. I hadn't even known she was in Vegas. Neither had her husband. She had simply taken the money and left. I was in complete shock. As business partners, she had full access to the funds, so legally it wasn't theft or embezzlement. But it was clear I had been completely blindsided by someone I thought had changed. This woman, who had once confessed to being a con artist, thief, and embezzler, had just done it again, this time to me. 3 days later, she was dead, a hero overdose. She died in an empty trailer in a parking lot in Stockton, California. No one had any idea why she was there. She lived in a completely different state. The unanswered questions haunted everyone. The unknowns drove us all crazy. There were no answers. Saddest part? Her husband and daughter both said it was the best thing that could have happened. Not long after her death, even more secrets came out. Hidden bank accounts, a secret apartment, financial messes she left behind. The chaos she left in her wake was staggering. To this day, I still can't wrap my head around it. Real life is so much more twisted, bizarre, and shocking than any story ever written. If someone tried to put this in a book, no one would believe it. Story 20. My mom had power of attorney over some clients' properties, and one of them needed an appraisal for legal purposes. I went with the appraiser to inspect the apartment, which had been rented for years by a tenant who always paid on time. I barely knew him, just that his checks arrived like clockwork. He was a lawyer, lived in a nice neighborhood, and I was pretty sure I knew his daughters. By all appearances, he was a respectable, professional man. When we arrived, he greeted us politely, but I noticed he looked a bit nervous. He unlocked the door, and the second I stepped inside, I realized why. He had turned the apartment into a full-fledged dungeon. That's when it clicked. I understood why I had been delegated to oversee the appraisal instead of my mom. It turned out this guy had been living a double life for over a decade. He had a mistress, a second family, and a secret existence that, as far as I knew, only my mom, her client, and I were aware of. He even had a daughter with his mistress, and she had a lovely Disney princess-themed bedroom. Right next to the mirrored ceiling, custom furniture, whips, and scented candles of the love nest he shared with her mother. I was 21 at the time and somehow managed to handle the situation professionally. But looking back, it was absolutely hilarious. The things you see on the job. Story 21. I once knew a girl from the United Arab Emirates who came to Canada for university. Her family was loaded. They owned a $5 million house back home, and she lived in a high-end apartment in downtown Toronto. Her allowance was massive, and she had a credit card with virtually no spending limits. Her family extremely conservative. Her mother wore a burqa, and their religious values were strict and unwavering. Her double life? She was a hardcore raver and party girl who was almost never sober. She was in an open relationship with an MTF trans girl, and her apartment was a complete disaster. Mirrors covered in ketamine, drug baggies stuffed into every conceivable crevice, takeout boxes stacked to the ceiling, clothes and trash everywhere. You could barely see the floor. It didn't matter what country you were from, she was a total mess. The thing was, her parents had no clue. If they knew even 1/10,000th of what was going on, she would have been in deep trouble. I'll never forget seeing her before one of her parents' visits. She was sitting there completely distraught, rocking back and forth, ketamine all over her face, muttering, "Gotta call Mary Maids, gotta call Mary Maids." Mary Maids was a professional cleaning service specializing in scrubbing down party houses. The day before her parents arrived, you could eat off the floors. The entire place was spotless. Clothes were ninja folded, all her crazy raver gear had been stashed at her girlfriend's place, and the fridge was stocked with fresh, healthy food. She herself was sober, bright-eyed, and looking like the picture-perfect daughter. It was like nothing had ever happened. Story 22. I was an intern at a large engineering firm during my senior year of college. I was an electrical engineering student and spent half my time at the firm working as an EE and the other half in an IT support role. The head of IT was very forward with me and the other young men in the office. It was easy for me to avoid her attention because my girlfriend would have lunch with me at work regularly, which helped maintain a professional distance. One of the other guys wasn't so lucky. He went out drinking with a group of office friends and she showed up. They hooked up, a bad idea in principle, but none of us could have guessed just how bad it would be. About a week later, he found flyers posted all around his neighborhood and at our office building, claiming he was a predator, a rapist, and worse. The flyers had enough detail for him to know they came from her. He immediately reported it to the general manager, explaining everything. This triggered an automatic investigation, and both of them were placed on leave. The firm hired a private investigator, and within a week, some shocking truths came to light. The IT manager wasn't who she claimed to be. Her identity had been stolen from a deceased person. The college she listed on her resume didn't exist. Shame on the firm for not checking before hiring her. She had chemically removed her fingerprints, likely using acid, and refused to provide a DNA sample. Obviously, the company fired her and alerted the police. She vanished. The address on file claimed they had never seen her, and no one knew where her mail was going. The strange thing was that she was incredibly smart and highly skilled across multiple systems. Maybe she had learned everything from experience, but I had no reason to doubt her education or credentials at the time. Looking back, I'm just grateful I never got caught up in her web. This happened 20 years ago, and it left a lasting impact on both my personal and professional life. Story 23. There was a manager at a Jimmy John's where I worked in Cincinnati. He was quiet, kept to himself, and was always on time. He did his job well. I was in school, so I wasn't there all the time, but when we worked together, he was reliable. He was also taking online courses at UC, some kind of business program, I think, but I don't really remember. One day, he didn't show up for work. No one could get a hold of him, and no one really knew where he lived. When his address was checked, no one answered. We were worried, but we figured he just bailed and moved on with our lives. Then one night after closing, we shut down at 3 a.m., a man knocked on the store door, trying to get in. My coworker wasn't interested and tried to ignore him, mouthing, "We're closed." She assumed he was a drunk student and would give up, until he held up his badge for Homeland Security. Turns out our missing manager was a cyber criminal, using the job and his online courses as a cover to steal money from elderly people. Who knew? Story 24. I used to work the front desk in an ER. One day, EMS brought in a man after a car accident. A little while later, a woman came to the desk and said, "My husband is here. He was just in a car accident." I checked with the unit, and they said he could have visitors, so I let her go back. Then I went on with my day. About 20 minutes later, another woman came to the desk and said, "My husband is here. He's been in a car accident." I knew damn well we only had one motor vehicle accident patient back there, but I asked for his name, thinking maybe she was at the wrong hospital. She wasn't. Now, it's not my place to judge other people's lifestyles. I'm polyamorous myself and know people who refer to each other as husband and wife, even if there are more than the usual number of partners involved. So I did my job. I called back and said, "There's a visitor here for room X. May she come back?" The unit clerk gave the okay, so I opened the door and let her in. This man was not polyamorous. He was living a double life on a Bruce Wayne level. He wasn't just having an affair, he had two separate families, two sets of children. He had convinced both women that he was legally married to them, and neither had any idea the other existed. There was, shall we say, a mild kerfuffle. In the end, the two women joined forces against him, walking out together and planning their respective divorces. It amazed me that his entire life blew up over a minor fender bender that wasn't even his fault. He looked absolutely haunted when he walked out. Story 25. My ex-stepfather was a well-off pilot for a local med-flight helicopter. He had 3 daughters who adored him, and he was always very kind to me and my sister. One of the nicest, most soft-spoken men I had ever met. He practically worshipped the ground my mom walked on. He also had violent blackout rages. After a year of marriage, he gave my mother a concussion and broke her leg in 3 places. I was told she had slipped and fallen. It wasn't until years after they split that I learned the full story. My mom was smart enough to get out while she could, and even smarter for not telling me back then. I was, and still am, significantly larger than he is, and I have a lot less to lose. I've only seen him once since then. He tried to be nice. I told him I knew everything, and if we weren't in the hospital where my girlfriend worked, I probably would have done something I couldn't take back. We don't talk anymore. Story 26. When I was 20, we used to party with this guy, Bob. Bob was in his early 30s and was dating a girl we had gone to school with. He seemed like a really stand-up guy. At the time, we were dealing with some guy who was leading us on about a house rental, claiming he would rent it to us while he was on deployment. Bob started questioning him about his military background and quickly concluded that the guy wasn't in the military at all, never had been, just some tool who liked to spin tall tales. This pissed Bob off because he was in the Army Reserves. When he was in town, he worked as a server. We had all taken him to the bus stop for his weekend duties, and we knew he had done his 2-week training. We were so close to Bob that a few of my friends even rented a house with him. One day, Bob asked to talk to me privately. He explained that his hours at the restaurant had been cut and he was a little short on rent. He asked if he could borrow $200 and I had no problem with it. He had just been accepted for a position with my friend, so I knew he had a steady job lined up. After all, Bob had been one of our best friends over the past year, and friends help each other out. Fast forward a week, and my friends hadn't seen their roommate, Bob, in days. To top it off, another friend of ours was struggling to find his girlfriend. She had seemingly vanished. It took a lot of brainstorming, but eventually we realized we had never really known Bob at all. He had asked all of us for money to pay rent. When we confronted his ex, the girl we went to high school with, she finally admitted everything. Bob had never been in the military. He had a recurring coca addiction, and he had run off to Virginia with my buddy Jim's girlfriend. Bob still owes me money, but honestly, he was otherwise a pretty cool dude to chill with. Story 27. I don't know if this was true or not, but back when I was a waitress, we had a regular customer who loved telling us stories about her family. One day, after being gone for a few months, she came back with a real doozy. Her family was extremely patriotic. Almost everyone had served in the military. Her grandfather had fought in World War II, and all her uncles and cousins had served. Her grandfather passed away first, then years later, her grandmother died. When she and her mother were cleaning out the old house, they found a box in the attic. Inside were several smaller boxes. She opened one and found a telegram inside, the kind that starts with, "We regret to inform you," along with some personal effects, which was strange because obviously her grandfather had survived World War II. But the name on the telegram didn't match his. She opened another box, same thing, and then another. She didn't remember the final count, but apparently her grandmother had lived near a training base during the war and had married somewhere between 6 and 15 young soldiers before they shipped out, men who had subsequently died overseas. She had kept an entire box of telegrams and personal effects in her attic since the 1940s. The last one survived. They had a 60-year marriage and half a dozen kids together. And until that day, none of their children or grandchildren had any clue. Story 28. Might be a bit long and confusing, but worth it. My partner and I were working one night when we were dispatched to check the welfare call regarding a missing person. A woman had reported her husband missing. She couldn't reach him by phone or email. She believed he was on a business trip. With the help of OnStar, she had tracked the location of his car. She provided our dispatch with the car's general location, a description, and details about her husband. Let's call him Hugh. We found the car parked in the driveway of a nice home in the rural part of our beat. At around 4 a.m., we knocked on the door. An older man answered, looking groggy. We asked who he was and if he knew who the car in his driveway belonged to. He identified himself as the homeowner and said the car belonged to his new son-in-law, Lord Bottomtooth, who was staying in the back house with his daughter. We asked the man to describe Lord Bottomtooth, and he nailed Hugh's description down to a T, right down to the British accent. But the names didn't match, so we headed to the back house. We knocked, and a surprisingly attractive younger woman answered. We asked for Lord Bottomtooth, and she called for him. When Hugh appeared, my partner addressed him by name, and he responded, before immediately trying to push us out the door. Now my partner doesn't tolerate liars. He loudly informed Hugh Toothy that his wife had reported him missing and his children were very worried. Hugh Toothy played dumb, but after a little prodding, he finally admitted the truth. He had wanted to start a new life with wife number 2. He had created a fake name and identity, planning to abandon wife number 1 and his kids entirely. We put wife number 1 on speakerphone to confirm his well-being. Meanwhile, I spoke with wife number 2. She had just married Toothy and had known him for a little over a year. She explained that he traveled a lot, which was actually when he was with family number 1. But he was planning to quit his job and move to Florida, into a house her parents had just bought them as a wedding gift. I politely broke the news to her. Toothy was actually Hugh, a married man with 2 kids, a mortgage, and a completely separate life. Wife number 2 was not pleased. Meanwhile, my partner was still on the phone with wife number 1. She was furious, screaming that Hugh was no longer welcome home and that he should just drop dead. Wife number 2 had a similar reaction and promptly sent her father after Toothy. Hugh Toothy gathered his things and got into his car, his 2 lives crumbling around him. Bonus points. My partner was pissed that Hugh Toothy was about to walk away without any consequences. At first, we believed there was no legal recourse, but after digging through our penal code book, we discovered that bigamy was actually a crime in our state. We filed charges, which put Toothy's residency status at risk. Story 29. My great-grandfather served in the Navy during World War II. While out at sea, his ship was bombarded, and he suffered severe injuries. He fell into a coma and was sent back to a Navy hospital in California. When he woke up, he met and fell in love with a Navy nurse, who later became his wife and my great-grandmother. A true World War II love story that my grandmother loves telling the family about. But a couple of years ago, she suddenly added a part to the story that she had never mentioned before. She told me that when she was a teenager, a Mexican woman showed up after searching for my great-grandfather for years and informed him that she was his real wife. Apparently, before the war, my great-grandfather had already been married. He had a wife and children with this woman, but when he woke up from his coma, he had no memory of them. So he stayed with my great-grandmother and started a new family, never looking back. As far as I know, he never had any contact with his first wife or children again. My grandmother only told me this once, and I'm not sure how much of it is true. She does have a habit of stretching the truth. But it's definitely an interesting double life story nonetheless. Story 30. My stepmother has a cottage up north, Canada, and I've been going there with my family since I was 8 or 9 years old. I'm 20 now. Her family had owned this cottage for decades, so they had been good friends with the neighbors for years. The man who currently owns the cottage next door, Jim, is a retired high school teacher. He lives with his second wife, Susan, and they were both in retirement. Jim and Susan were incredibly nice, outgoing, fun, and genuinely great people to be around. Over the years, we became very close, and they felt like my grandparents up there. Jim was a talented guitarist. His 12-string was the best I had ever heard. He would entertain everyone with jokes and music. He also had a stone pizza oven and would invite all the neighbors over for pizza nights, always making sure everyone felt welcome. Fast forward to last summer. Jim and Susan weren't at their cottage like they usually were when my family visited. It seemed odd, but I didn't think much of it. Then my parents told me the truth. Jim had been arrested on multiple charges related to child exploitation. I'll spare the details, but the case was disgusting. He had been released on bail by his ex-wife and lived with her until his hearing, where he was sentenced to just 12 months in prison. I was shocked. I had spent my whole life thinking he was this kind, friendly man. The idea that he had been living a double life, secretly involved in something so horrific, was one of the biggest betrayals I had ever experienced. Story 31. My uncle was the kind of guy who was very westernized, considering he came from an Islamic country. He lived in London and would always take my cousin on holiday with his white best friend. I was jealous. I wished I could go on trips like that with my dad. His friend would stay over often, and he was really into Asian culture, so he was a cool guy. My uncle passed away from cancer in the 90s. Years later, when I got married, I was talking about going abroad, mentioning how my uncle had traveled a lot. Then my wife dropped a bombshell. You know he was gay, right? The white guy was his boyfriend. The only reason they used to take your cousin on those trips was to make it look like a family holiday. I was gobsmacked. Suddenly, everything started making sense. The ages of his kids, the fact that he didn't bring his wife over for 15 years when everyone else had, and even the photos of his friend. Looking back, the guy had been very flamboyant. I've never asked my cousin about it, just in case he doesn't know. It wouldn't be right to tarnish my uncle's memory for a piece of gossip that no longer matters to anyone. Story 32. I can only say so much without ruining someone's life, but I went to high school with a guy, or girl, who just disappeared one day. Rumors spread, dead in jail, murdered. It was an open secret that they were deeply involved in a drug ring. Fast forward a year, and the ring is busted. Lots of people arrested, retaliatory gang violence. People got hurt, or worse. This wasn't just some kids cutting drugs. They were in deep. You may or may not have seen it on the news. Fast forward another 4 years. I'm in a completely different state, far away, and I see this person in a fast food joint, just casually eating inside. I walk up to them and say, "Hey, Duty Dudette, you're alive." They go pale or less black or less olive-skinned. Basically, they look like they had just seen a ghost. Then they say, "You absolutely cannot tell anybody you saw me. If word gets out, it'll be a race between the bad guys and the marshals to find me." Turns out they had flipped on the drug ring and entered witness protection. I have never seen someone so terrified in my life. They were legitimately afraid that by simply eating in a public place, they had just signed their own death sentence. Story 33. My ex, we were together for a couple of years and he had to move up north for work. We're in the UK, so it wasn't that far. We saw each other every other weekend. The plan was for him to finish his PhD, and then one of us would move to be with the other. Meanwhile, he was so busy with work and his PhD that we couldn't see each other during the week or even go on holiday. I thought that was perfectly reasonable. I was wrong. Turns out he had another girlfriend in a different northern city. The weekends he wasn't with me, he was with her. I was completely blindsided. The only reason I found out was because one weekend, while I was at his place, she decided to surprise him with a visit. He was out for a run. We started talking. By the time he came home, I told him to go fuck himself and left. She and I kept in touch after that. It turned out he was acting like two different people with us. With me, he was geeky, into media and reading. With her, he was laddish and into sports. I thought we were planning a future together, talking about having kids. Meanwhile, she had children from a previous marriage and he refused to see them. I knew all his friends. She had only met his brother once, because he must have told him that we had broken up. Honestly, it sounded like he was a complete arse to her, but I think he was a little scared of me. He would send me pictures of what he was doing all the time. Apparently, he was telling her to get out of the way so he could take pictures without her in them. She put together all the furniture in his flat, while he texted me the whole time, updating me about it. He came down to London to spend my birthday with me, while he had told her to wait for him at his place for 3 days. When I found all this out, I just thought, what is actually wrong with you? Anyway, long story short, I told everyone in his life. Now he has no friends. Story 34. I hope this doesn't get buried because it was insane and affected a lot of lives. After my mom and dad divorced when I was 8, my mom started dating a guy named Lee from work. It was about a year after the divorce. Just to clarify, this guy was really nice. He treated us well, made time for us whenever we had big events, and over the years he became like a second dad to me. So many memories. I could go into more detail about how important he was to my mom, my brother, and me, but it would just drag on. Then during my senior year of high school, things started to change. They began fighting a lot. It got worse because people kept asking why they weren't married yet, why he had no social media, and why, after 9 years, he still lived an hour away in his own place. He commuted from another town where he was an assistant manager. He assured my mom that nothing was wrong. She had been to his house, gone through his phone, with his permission, and still she had never met his immediate family, even though he had met all of ours. He said things were just a little rough right now, but he was finally ready to look at houses and engagement rings. For a few weeks, things seemed to get better. Then it got crazy. One night, my mom got a call from a coworker who said she needed to talk about Lee. When she called back, the woman dropped the insane news, something that, in hindsight, should have been more obvious. Lee had been living a double life for almost 10 years. He was married, he had 2 kids. One was 5 years old and the other was only a few months old. This guy, who had spent the night with us every other weekend when we weren't staying with our dad, had an entire other family. No clue whose house my mom had visited with him, but it clearly wasn't his. He had spent so much money on us, been emotionally supportive for years, and had completely fooled all of us. When it all came out, my mom apologized to us, but it wasn't her fault. We felt terrible for her. Eventually, his sister, who he had told us was mentally unstable, not true at all, found out. She was so shocked that she threw up in our kitchen. Meanwhile, his wife was in denial and refused to talk to any of us. And the best part? He told his wife and family that he had only had a brief affair with my mom years ago. Just 2 times, and that was it. He claimed he had no idea who my brother and I were, and that my mom was lying. We gave his family pictures for proof and tried to move on with 0 contact. Since then, my mom has only heard from him once and ignored him. But a year later, his wife finally reached out. She wanted to meet because she was finally ready to hear the truth. This whole thing messed with us, but my mom has come a long way, and somehow it all worked out because my mom and dad got back together. After both being in long-term relationships, they found their way back. Still, I will never forgive that man, and I hope that one day I see him while I'm with my own kids, and that it destroys him. Story 35. This one is about me. It's not so much a double life reveal, but the opposite. I was a pretty nerdy teenager who just wanted to chill and play games with my friends from school. I was the only Asian kid in my school, so most of my friends were white guys who were just as nerdy as me. We spent all our time playing games. Then came university. The internet was still in its infancy, and chat rooms were becoming a thing. When I wasn't at lectures, I was online, chatting away. Since I wasn't exactly the most sociable talker. A couple of my housemates were social, though. They dragged me out to clubs every now and then, but honestly, university was pretty boring for me in that sense. However, whenever I went back home for the holidays, I decided to embellish a little. I told everyone I had this insane party life at uni. Drinking, partying, swimming in women. That was my apparent life. I mean, who would ever find out the truth? So, I developed a reputation as a ladies' man. In reality, the only phone numbers I had were my fellow geeks. Years later, I got married. My wife started asking me some strange questions about university, mostly about girls. I told her the truth, that I was a massive geek who spent more time in the library or computer lab than anywhere else. She didn't believe me. Then she hit me with, "What about the girl you got pregnant?" That's when it clicked. Someone had told her about my alleged wild uni days. In the end, I took her to meet an old university friend who immediately confirmed what a huge geek I was, that I was too shy to ever ask a girl out, let alone live the life I had claimed. Story 36. Working for the railroad, moving freight, means taking a train long distances to other cities. A one-way trip is already a 12-hour workday, and when you finish, you stay in a hotel. Since the job is on call, you sometimes sit in these hotels for 24 to 40 hours, just waiting to be assigned to take a freight train back to your home terminal. Then once you're back home, you wait another 24 to 40 hours before doing it all over again. The timing varies, but this is basically how the job works. Well, I worked with a guy who had a wife and kids in his home terminal. Let's call it Town A. He followed the exact routine I described. Back and forth from Town A to his away-from-home terminal, Town B. Then he died unexpectedly. When the state started sorting out his possessions, they ran into a problem. The man had another wife and children in Town B. Every time he went from Town A to Town B, he wasn't staying in a hotel. He was staying in a house he had bought with his Town B family. And when he traveled back to Town A, same thing. His Town A family thought he was just on another shift. Neither family had any idea the other existed until he died, and they started fighting over who got what was left of his estate. Story 37. When I was 18, my parents divorced. The way it started felt almost like a bad joke. My dad was sleeping, and my mom came into the room, saying she was going to the store for cigarettes. She never came back. We had zero indication she was leaving. At first, we thought something had happened. Maybe she got into a wreck. When my dad woke up, I told him she had left for the store. It should have been at most an hour round trip, but I hadn't paid much attention to the time. After a few hours, we got worried. We borrowed my grandmother's van. She lived on the same farm as us, and went looking for her. It was a Saturday, I believe. We tried filing a missing persons report, but they told us to wait 24 hours. So we decided to wait until Monday and check her work. A little background. My parents had been together for 22 years and married for 18. They had both worked at first, but after I finished 8th grade, they decided to homeschool me because they believed the system was setting me up for failure. My dad became a stay-at-home parent while my mom worked. I never saw them fight. My dad was never physically abusive toward her or me. At worst, he would get frustrated about the house being messy or the yard not being mowed, which were my chores. But he never yelled in a way that felt abusive. He'd just vent his frustrations. I wasn't under the illusion that their relationship was perfect, but I had no indication it was falling apart. Neither did my dad. On Monday, we drove our old van to my mom's work. We found her there, and my dad confronted her. That's when she told him she had decided to leave him. He was floored, shocked, hurt, angry, a flurry of emotions. He told her we had no food in the house, true, no money, also true, and begged her to at least leave something to get us through. On the way home, our van broke down. My dad managed to rig it enough to get back, but it was barely holding together. So now it was just my dad and me. No food, no money, except for $18 we scraped together from around the house and whatever pocket change my mom had handed him. No vehicle. Somehow we stretched that money for 2 weeks. Thankfully, my grandmother, my dad's mother, intervened and helped him get a truck so he could look for a job. He found one quickly and was able to provide for us again. In those first 2 weeks, my mom only stopped by the house once when my dad wasn't home. She mostly collected clothes and left. I talked to her briefly and asked why she was doing this. She told me she couldn't take living with him anymore, that she felt scared to be around him. To this day, I don't understand why. I never saw my dad do anything that would make her afraid of him. She said she had a place to stay and that I could move in with her. But I wasn't going to abandon everything I knew for a reason I couldn't even comprehend. So I stayed with my dad. I watched him go through the entire grief process. Hours of pacing, staring out the front door, lost in his thoughts. It went from shock to hurt to self-reflection. What did I do? And finally to anger and bitterness over how she handled it. They never saw each other again. The divorce was handled entirely through the mail, without contest. My dad actually initiated it. Then we found out why she left. My mom was terrible with money. I knew she was in debt, but as a teenager, I had no real awareness of our financial situation. We lived in a trailer on my grandmother's farm. Because of this, our monthly expenses were low. No rent, just utilities, insurance, internet, and a phone bill. Our total monthly costs were under $500, and yet we had no food in the house. She was always late on bills. Our electricity and internet were cut off multiple times because of non-payment. I lived off peanut butter sandwiches for weeks. I was 18 when she left, 5'10", and only 120 pounds. 10 years later, I weigh closer to 190, and I'm not fat. My mom worked at factories, earning between $14 and $17 an hour. In the late 90s and early 2000s, that went a lot further than it does today. When she left, my dad discovered an entire trunk of unpaid bills and credit collection notices in one of our broken-down cars. She hadn't even been paying auto insurance on our vehicles. The only explanation was that she had planned this for a while. Either she had been stashing money away, or she already had someone else to live with. We believe it was the latter. After she left, she would occasionally call to talk to me. She sent birthday and Christmas money in the mail, but we barely spoke. I didn't avoid her. I just had nothing to say. 4 years later, I met a girl. We had a son. I told my mom about her grandchild and let her back into my life a little. I wanted my child to know his grandparents, so I let her visit. That's when I found out she had remarried. She married a man she had worked with. Most likely the same man who gave her a place to stay when she left us. I've been to their house a few times. Her new husband is nice enough, but I can't form any real connection with him. We never talk about my dad. She acts like nothing ever happened. And while I still see her occasionally, I feel nothing toward her. She doesn't feel like my mother. But honestly, that disconnect didn't start when she left. It gradually happened throughout my teenage years.